should we really be separating kind of almost different Bitcoin epochs? And essentially, we have very early high growth phase now.
Oh, yeah.
Then we kind of maybe have transitional period with lower growth. And then if we reach what Jeff thinks, which is hyper Bitcoinization, it's an entirely new kind of world we're living in.
Yeah.
So yes, and I totally agree with that. But if you play that forward on what's happening, if you just said, that's why I keep just going back to first principles and simplifying this. The question that George is actually raising is, would I would I do what Peter did and leverage my stuff on blockchain or BlockFi? And would they go broke, or would somebody go broke because of the games that somebody was always going to give you more margin and you would chase the margin? And there will be tons of people that get wiped out because of that, and tons of companies that get wiped out because of that. And human nature will drive that. BlackRock is going to do an ETF. Some people are going to put it in there. That's going to be a centralizing function, and there's going to be a whole bunch of these. And if these games are played on top of this, and it breaks the decentralization security, I would say George is right. I suspect that won't happen. And I suspect that won't happen because of things like this conversation. And if you just follow first principles, prices follow marginal cost of production, exponentially increasing productivity, and if it stays decentralized and secure, meaning if people self-custody and it stays decentralized and secure, and don't play as many of these games, it effectively is going to wipe out people that are playing these games and keep on going. So what you're talking about in the early epochs versus the later epochs is the exact same trend that is saying, and that is repricing today's global wealth, let's call it 900 trillion, into 21 million. And that'll come, and it'll feel like, but most people are measuring from their US system or Argentina system or whatever debasement they're taking on their currency. They're measuring Bitcoin in their currency. So what it's actually saying is they're trading Bitcoin. They're traders, right? And what's actually happening is Bitcoin is repricing it all. And so the speed of, when you're talking about the epochs, you're talking about the speed of repricing. And that speed of repricing is going to be changing over time, because currencies could, let's use an example I use often. In Argentina, it's not like there's 100% Bitcoiners. Why not? So in this case, George is right? They got 120% inflation, and everybody is leaning into the system, thinking there's a fix from within the system, and they just got rug pulled on their currency. And then because of that currency devaluation, investment will race in, take advantage of cheap labor. People will be fooled into that again, and then they'll get rug pulled again. And each time through that thing happening all around the world, it's going to create more and more Bitcoiners. But the repricing that we're talking about is there's a result of all these things happening.
Yeah, but if you go to Argentina, what are they using, Jeff? They're using dollars.
Yeah, and Bitcoin and
Tether gotten rug pulled. And I'm not saying that it's a panacea. I'm not saying it's great, but I am saying that that's part of the network effect that the dollar has, is that you go to Turkey, which I've been there recently, you go to Argentina, and you look in the cash register, and they're not using Turkish lira and Argentinian pesos. It's full of dollars. And it makes sense, if you're them.
I totally agree with that. And in fact, it gives the system more strength. Right, because all of those areas that are defaulting or debasing are making their currencies cheaper in the U.S. Relation, and allowing the U.S. to export more inflation around the world, and strengthening. So network effects of something like the dollar don't end overnight. This is something I totally
That's going to be one that, in my opinion, is probably the biggest challenge that Bitcoin faces, as far as taking it to its last bucket or epoch, whatever you want to call it, to where it becomes the global currency. Is just, we've never seen a network as powerful as the U.S. dollar ever in human history. And so, and it's a lot.
If you ask that,
for Americans, it's hard for them to understand, because their expenses are denominated in dollars, and therefore they see their expenses go up. They see the dollar lose value. But if your expenses are denominated in another currency, such as the Colombian peso, where I'm right now, holding dollars, you actually would have increased your purchasing power relative to local goods and services because until recently, the dollar had appreciated so much relative to the peso. It appreciated more than the rate of local inflation. And so that's very, very powerful, especially when that's happened over decades and it's generational. Even if the dollar loses, let's say 1% relative to local goods and services annually, that's something that people can depend on. So I'm not here to cheerlead for the dollar or anything, but that is part of the probabilities, right? That's part of the whole equation when you're trying to think about when or if Bitcoin could replace something like the dollar. But one thing I also wanted to throw in there, because we were talking about getting a percentage, an interest rate on your savings, but it's not just that. I think it's the debt side that would really, there'd be a lot of demand for fractional reserve because, I think people are still going to want to borrow money. They're still going to want to borrow Bitcoin. They want to buy a house. They don't have the money. And even if it's not fractional reserve, if it's full reserve, they're going to be paying a much higher interest rate, where you've got a bank that comes out and says, listen, we'll do this fractional reserve stuff. And we've done it in the past. It wasn't a big deal. And instead of having to pay an 8% mortgage, now you only have to pay a 5% mortgage. So I think people are going to gravitate towards that as well. So I think you will have demand from the wanting to get a higher interest rate on your savings, and then also because it's cheaper, it's cheaper to borrow. And I think that's one of the main reasons. There's a lot of them, but one of the main reasons why we see so much dollar-denominated debt right now. Why does Argentina, have so much dollar-denominated debt? Because it's cheap. Because they can borrow dollars at 3 or 4% when they can borrow pesos at whatever 15, 20%. And so that entrenches that network, and I think that's what people will gravitate towards.
Yeah, George, you're right on some of this, but if you're denominating in Bitcoin, you can already see what's happening, right? So 3 years ago, my lake house cost 300 Bitcoin. My lake house has gone up about 20% in those 3 years, maybe more than that. And now my lake house is 50 Bitcoin, right? So when you're talking about, I'm going to lever into a different system, you're actually saying I'm going to pay way more into and all the debt and everything else. Whereas if you're talking about Bitcoin, you're actually repricing everything over time.
Yeah, I understand. But if I want to buy your lake house for 50 Bitcoin and I don't have the 50 Bitcoin, I want to borrow it. And I want to borrow it at the cheapest interest rate.
Yeah, and you will try, or you will keep on saving in Bitcoin and buy it outright.
Yeah, but who does that, Jeff? I mean, I get, in an ideal world, I get it. Maybe the Japanese do that to a greater degree than Americans. But as Americans, to think that we're going to transition into this world in 20 years when no one's going to want debt, or no one's going to want a car loan or a mortgage, I just don't think that's realistic.
This is actually why in this kind of American focus, because American focus is the US dollar and it's had so much network effect we take for granted. My entire life has been building networks and technology and understanding network effects. It's how I came up to the thesis that I did, and understanding how powerful network effects. In fact, 70% of all value created in technology companies is due to a network effect. The U.S. dollar has the same network effect, and it drives all of our purchasing. Totally understand, and so. What ends up happening, though, is what ends up happening to a monopoly with network effects, once the network effects start ending, right, is people don't see it. And they do the same thing that Kodak did, inventing the digital camera. And what ends up happening is the network effect moves to the people furthest away from the monopoly. So what's happening right now through Bitcoin is it's moving, because I've never seen something in human history. I haven't seen an example of something that offers way faster, cheaper, and safer that is lost, that is open to anybody to play, that is ever lost against a monopoly, ever. And what is happening right now at Bitcoin, why it's moving from the bottom up, why you'd see El Salvador move to it first, why you're seeing all these other countries move to it first, is because it's enhancing their ability to compete. And you're going to see this, and I see it because I'm at the nexus of that all around the world. I know Peter's traveled around the world seeing this as well. And when you see this impacting communities at a level outside of what we're talking about in what protects the monopoly, you understand it's unstoppable. If it stays decentralized and secure, it's unstoppable. And so you have a new, more powerful network effect that's emerging from the bottom up. And what I would say is most people are misunderstanding vastly, dramatically, what that means to the existing network effect. Not that it'll end tomorrow. I totally agree with you there. But by the time, as you have something that gets more and more powerful with every node and every user that joins it, it becomes more powerful to the point, and the monopoly can't avoid it.
Yeah, but people
let me throw my context. Yeah, let me throw my context. Then put a question to you, George.